Hi, Nathan here with a quick editor's note. Paul has been gracious enough to offer one of our viewers or listeners a free copy of the Street Wolves game and Volume 1 of the Street Wolves Archetypes PDF. If you want to enter, just listen for Paul's favorite Star Wars movie and email him at tablecatgames@gmail.com and you'll be entered into a random drawing. Thanks for watching. Hello and welcome to the Advanced Age Role-Playing Gamers podcast. I'm Nathan. I'm one of your hosts tonight. For a special edition of Between Two GMs, I've got a different interviewer with me, slightly different. We're going to call him Malcolm tonight. Is that your real name, Malcolm?
That is what we'll use for this broadcast.
That sounds very good. But you may recognize Malcolm's dulcet tones from our Sex, Drugs, and Saving Throws actual play. I recognize him from just being my friend for the past billion years. Though he's gotten a lot older and he's gotten a lot more grayer. And I've been talking to him about those dyes that take the gray out of your beard, but he's not listening to me. But anyway, so say hello, Malcolm.
Hello, and it's a pleasure to be here on tonight's broadcast for the 2 GMs for ARP.
Woo! All right. So
wow, that was clumsy. Sorry.
That's fine. We're going to keep that in because I can make fun of you later. But so
Fantastic.
We've got Paul with us. Paul is the founder, creator of Table Cat Games.
Hello, nice to meet you guys.
Thanks for being on here, Paul.
Yes, thank you so much.
If you guys aren't aware, I think you've hit silver on downloads from Drive-Thru RPG for Street Wolves.
Yeah, silver on drive-through, and then with my other sales combined, I'm up to 200 some, so doing pretty good so far. But yeah, just on drive-through, we just hit silver this last week, and then I'm getting close to 1,000 downloads of the Jumpstart overall.
Oh.
So I'll probably be plugging that so we can hit that 1,000 soon too.
Well, I'm sure I'll put links for the Jumpstart and for your itch and your drive-through links for Street Wolves. But if for those of you who aren't aware of Street Wolves, it is a game built for Savage. The Savage Worlds was it called the is it Explorers Edition, Adventure Edition?
Adventure Edition.
Yeah. They don't make that easy. I was like, why don't they just second, third, fourth? That's easy.
When I first got into it, I had to figure it out too. It's SWADE is what it's called, generally, and that's the latest version that you want.
Yeah.
I've been following you on Twitter for a while, and we've chatted back and forth, and you seem like a halfway decent guy. So I thought I'd have you on, and I was kind of drawn to the whole Street Wolves vibe because that's kind of it seems to be representing the era that I grew up. That was was pretty traumatizing and awful for me, but also very, very interesting. So it's got a lot of draw for me, and I think maybe some other folks who listen to our show or watch our show, it might bring in some good what's the word?
Vibes.
Nostalgia vibes. Yeah. So why don't you let's start off with, you've got a lot of stuff going on right now. We were talking a little bit about that before. Why don't we just start off with Street Wolves and give us the rundown on what that setting is and all of that.
So Street Wolves is a neo-noir action adventure, synthwave inspired setting for Savage Worlds. So basically it breaks down, I like to say that it's rad but moody. So it takes place in 87, a slightly altered 1987 from the real one, but it's still pretty grounded in reality. There's secrets and evil lurking under the surface. It's very synthwave influenced, meaning not just the art that I don't know if anybody's familiar with synthwave who's listening right now, but look it up. It's awesome. But the art's usually like a person standing next to their car at night, and there's all this neon, and there's like color saturations and that sort of stuff. And there's a certain kind of aesthetic to it, and then there's also this feeling of that the world is clean and shiny and tech offers a hope for a better world, but there's these secrets that lurk under the surface with strangers and mysteries and discoveries and stuff. I like to think of it so some people think of they see Street Wolves and they think that it's cyberpunk, but it's not. It's almost a proto cyberpunk. So technology hasn't gone crazy yet. We're not living in that dystopia just yet, but it could be just over the horizon, right? Like we're
Okay.
in the past and things look good, but really they aren't under the surface. So
When you look at like the shows from that era, like the Miami Vice and stuff like that, there's a lot of the fashion and looking cool, but there's a lot of griminess for, you've got the, like in those shows, there's a lot of like drugs and prostitution and stuff like that. Some of the stuff that was just like was really taboo then is maybe more mainstream now.
I would say, but I think one thing it's about that time is that we were still very good propaganda wise, as far as just the media and so forth, is being able to sort of like cover up what was really happening in certain situations,
Yeah.
as far as our pop culture was concerned. I mean,
yeah,
I'll be honest, Paul. That was my impression when looking at Street Wolves and viewing it. A lot of it, to me, comes through a lens of the '80s sort of pop culture, is how we want the world to be. And yet we still had to recognize, even in our pop culture, that it was going to be this sort of grimy. Yes, not everyone lived like heart to heart, or was or had the glitz and glamour. I mean, there was no police department in the world that I knew of at that time ever had the budget that in Miami Vice would, to be able to buy those cars for their officers to be working undercover without the use of being funneling money and so forth. And the thing is, the great thing about, and Street Wolves, of course, is also taps that whole entire feeling. Well, it was tapped in by a lot of shows back then. It was like, these are a special team that's going to do this kind of thing and do this for you by who. And I love the way you have that sort of set up. And it's kind of like, it does tick a lot of the little nostalgia boxes for me, as far as the general side. Yeah.
well, I was gonna say that was one reason. Like this was heavily influenced by Miami Vice, and I don't want to talk about Miami Vice the whole time, but I grew up while it was on, and I remember my dad watching it, but I didn't really get into it until a few years ago because I kind of wrote it off as that pop culture joke. Oh, the pastel colors, blah blah blah. But then when you watch it, there are a lot of these dark themes where the heroes don't really win all the time, and there's these terrible things that happen to them. I gonna give a spoiler for a 40 years old show now. I don't even know how old it is. I want to think about it. So
Yeah.
check out if you don't want to know the end of the series. But the cops quit at the end because they realized they're not making a difference, right? And that was quite a difference from other things I've watched. Where it glorifies the police doing their job and all this kind of stuff, where it was like they don't quit, they always win at the end, right? And that's one reason why I like Miami Vice, is it just had this really dark theme and it had a really nihilistic ending.
That was one of its distinct departures from a lot of media that had been coming out before then, as far as how we were presented with, police shows, and how we were considered with, the vigilante hero shows. They were always, it's like basically they would get the bad guy in the end. There would be some crime that was punished, but in truth, as far as what we're seeing in our real world, nothing was ever changing. It seems, it was either getting worse, or the problem was being ignored, or we were covering it up as something else. So, the Miami Vice show, I remember my parents being very kind of like, they weren't really keen on me watching that show. It was like too adult at the time, and things were, the themes
It was pretty
were,
adult, yeah.
So yeah, as a kid, I didn't watch it. Our older brothers did.
Oh, I watched it.
I didn't watch it until later, because it was like there was a whole entire thing about not watching. We were all very aware. And the thing is, a lot of the actual tropes that were used in the show, or I didn't call them tropes, but a lot of the situations were replicated in other shows, but never ever taken to that full degree. It was always you sort of encounter the drug use, you encounter the bust, but you knew the good guys were going to win in the end. They weren't going to lose. And it was a very scary thing, I think, for a lot of networks, the idea of having a show where they didn't. even now, but particularly back then, you had a very different way that networks and censorship was done. So there were things that could be seen as, corrupting and could be, have a backlash that would, be slower, but, definitely have its impact as far as, overall society, how they viewed it, depending on what side. Yeah. Sorry.
So, yeah, I want to jump in and just to touch on something that I personally enjoy with gaming, tabletop gaming, and what you're kind of tapping into is just the fact that it's like okay for those characters in the show, the characters in the game, it's okay to not win every time, because that's still, you can still move the story forward with a defeat, or if you want to call it a setback, or whatever you want to call it. Like, you don't really have to win every time. Sometimes you kind of have to get beaten down a bit before you kind of rise to the next challenge, or you take another shot at it. So what are your thoughts on that type of situation, using your setting as a way to kind of let the GMs create stories that where they're sometimes they're the heroes aren't gonna save the day?
Well, so I'm glad you bring this up because it's actually relates directly to something I'm working on next. But we'll talk about Street Wolves for a second. So Street
Mm.
Wolves itself has a mechanic called Drive, which is a reworked version of the sanity system from Savage Worlds Horror Companion, the old Horror Companion.
Yeah.
And I reworked it to kind of replicate that the job is hard, that things you see, things you might do will have they'll take a toll on you, and then the only way you can try to regain some of that drive is through like just being off the job, which there's like a
Okay.
leave thing, which leave is very much inspired by interludes or those kinds of systems in games where there's like a mini game sort of where, okay, we're between adventures, we're going to roll some dice and figure out what happened and tell a story that way. In particular, Delta Green was a really big inspiration for that because there's the
Okay.
home scenes, and I just love those. And I was like, I want like some sort of interlude to work with this whole thing. So I guess that's kind of sidestepping your question because it's like it really depends on what how much drive people lose and how the players play act that, but it gives you an opportunity to role play that out, like, oh, I just lost, I'm at 2 drive and I've lost my friends and I've picked up a habit hindrance or something like that. And it's like now you can go from there and just see if your street wolf can pull themselves up out of this or if they're just going to sink even lower. But the thing that I'm working on next is an adventure called Heart of Glass. I'd love to talk more about, but
Yeah.
specifically, it starts out with the heroes failing. So what you do is
Mm.
you work with the players to create a kind of like a mini story. Like you don't have to play it through. You just kind of work out the backstory of what happened. And I even have a chart or a table, I should say, where you can see like what the bad thing that happened if the players need help, like maybe an innocent person got hurt, maybe a street wolf died, and you start out in this adventure, you're in a car together and the wolf pack has cut you off in this one, so you're on your own and you've all had this horrible traumatic experience, so now you have to deal with it going forward, and you make a drive check. Is great. I've run through this fully tested once. I'm going to go through another run through soon. But one of my players critically failed on his drive check, so he lost like a ton of drive. And so it was just like whatever happened really affected you. How does it affect you? And then like going forward, you try to carry that through the adventure, right? As you go along, that they're carrying this trauma with them. It sounds very dire, and it is, and it's
No,
awesome.
no, no, no. You had me at,
I was like,
when you're talking about like them starting off in a horrible situation. That's my love language.
Oh, okay.
So
yeah, that is completely his love
I
language.
guess I'm kind of infamous for starting off with my whatever system running where like everybody is already like lost everything and they have to get whatever it is, they have to get it back. Or if I don't do it at the beginning, I do it somewhere in the
Yeah,
campaign.
that's my thing. It's usually like everything's going great. Oh no, it's not. It's getting funny worse. And then suddenly you get a shot. But I do love that as a starting off, and allowing different people, different GMs to handle how they would do it, because you could easily transition from one game to another for another session. Like you succeeded in beating the guy here, and the next adventure you've lost something against this guy, so you continue this sort of story on that. I really do like that. So when you're talking about the drive, and there's a lot of mechanics as far as relationships in here as well, and as far as how do they play impact as far as recovering while you're on leave and stuff like that. Do they all have a factor in that, or I just want to make certain I was understanding that, because there you've introduced from the basic Savage World some very specific mechanics for your game world, is how I'm gonna call it, genre, that really keynote how that genre is sort of received, how it's processed, and how these heroes are able to pull this together. And I just wanted to if you can go into that as well.
So the relationships was kind of this thing again, and I don't want to be accused of ripping off Delta Green, but it was very much inspired by the fact that your heroes have connections, right, outside of the job. And you watch, like, again, Miami Vice, and Crockett has his ex-wife, right, and his son, which they kind of write off a little bit, but he's got connections, right? And then Tubbs has got problems with, like, his ex comes back and all this stuff, and it's like, I want that in my games. And so in order to encourage that, not every player is going to do this, but you say, okay, well, give me at least X amount of relationships, and you can have fun with it, right? Like, oh, this is my ex-girlfriend, this is my estranged brother, that sort of thing. And then a GM can bring those characters in the story if they want. So this really isn't a mechanical thing. It's more of a RP or story thing. But then the mechanics of it are, you can lose points with those people, and then you could try to roleplay like what that looks like, right? Like, if you reach 1 or 0 points, that relationship's essentially broken now. And like on your leave, that's where it ties in of, well, you can choose all these activities. Well, I'm going to choose to try to make amends with my sister, right? And then, you make a roll, you tell a little story, and you try to, increase that value. So it's not like there's a penalty if you don't have that many relationships, but I try to encourage my players, like, let's show how this works, or what does this look like when your brother doesn't want to talk to you anymore, that sort of thing.
Well, the relationship mechanic sort of replace how contacts and enemies in Savage World sort of function as well.
Oh, not really. This is more like its own side
mechanic
thing.
As far as okay, all right.
Yeah, like, I mean, you essentially, so I've started some characters, like I say, like, you can start the game with a 0 relationship, and then that we can call your former boss that tried to kill you, right? That you were friends with. But there's not really like, there's not really like anything replacing anything else. It's kind of like it exists to feed into your character's story. And then also it does, like, things like the drive stuff do affect it, right? Like, if you lose so much drive, then your relationships suffer by this. Making new relationships and making amends is way harder to do when you have no drive. Like, if you're, like, one of the examples of a low drive operative I have is, you get into the mind of a serial killer and you're completely obsessed with finding out who that is. Well, it's kind of hard to, like, hang out with your son or whatever, right? When you're just constantly thinking about the serial killer. So there's just a lot of things that kind of interplay between drive and relationships in that respect.
One thing we kind of skipped over is like what a street wolf character is, and maybe we can go into that by talking a bit about Heart of Glass.
Okay, so
and like what that adventure is about. And
well, so Street Wolves, and I give several options for GMs to set the game up however they want.
I did like that.
The default is there's this organization called Wolfpack, and they know about these conspiracies and whatnot, and they want to put a stop to it. So they are working off the books to get agents to, go on missions and do problem solving and help people that can't be helped because there's all this corruption and stuff, and you can't trust the actual authorities to do the job.
Yeah.
And one of the influences for Street Wolves is G.I. Joe. I don't know if you can see, I have G.I. Joes up here too.
Yeah.
That in the world of Street Wolves, there was essentially a group that was like G.I. Joe, but they kind of failed and were disbanded. And that Wolfpack is formed by like some of the survivors of that. Like they realize what's
former
happening.
operatives and that, yeah. Mhm.
Yeah, so the former group was Timberwolf, and that's how the whole wolf thing gets started. The Street Wolves are essentially kind of like secret agents off the books. They go places, but not secret agents or cops like you'd see on TV, more like a detective and a con artist and, a thief. And you have these characters like the detective might have been a boxer that killed somebody in the ring is one of the examples, I guess.
It's kind of funny that you say that, but there were a lot of shows that were built around this sort of very similar sort of character types, not as a group usually. I mean, you'd have like, Newcastle and McCormick or Hardcastle and McCormick, and you'd have like basically a judge and one of his perps are teaming up to solve crime with a small. Anyway, it made no sense, but it was the 80s.
Well, yeah. So a lot of the archetypes are based on like the neo-noir concepts of these and sort of anti-heroes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Because at first, when I first made it, all these like people were good. Like, it was like, oh, these are all really great people. And then I started coming up with professions like, why don't I have a thief in here? Why don't I have a con artist? And then that's when it really started humming along. I was like, this is more fun now.
Mm.
And that was the thing I was also sort of curious about it is the use of the profession templates for Savage Worlds. Normally, they just sort of just say, you're going to come up with it, which, can be great for some people. But I think it's very helpful when they do have templates. And I did really like the professions you came up with and how they worked out.
Yeah, so when you're making a character, you're making your street wolf who works for Wolfpack, you get to pick a profession, and it's not a class.
Yeah.
It's basically, it gives you some extra bonuses to do that job that you want to do, but you're not locked into it in any way. It's like you get that basic package of, 3 extra skills, and then I think an edge. I say I think because it's been a while since I read my own book. But you get that extra stuff, and it also there's skill specializations if you use those. I know people hate skill specializations, so they're totally optional. Don't yell at me. But you would get skill specializations too for that job, and then from there, just make whatever character you want. So if you want to make a demolitionist who's good at ballet or whatever, go for it. Right? There's nothing stopping you. I found that that's a really good way to do it. I know there's other alternative ways to handle it in Savage Worlds, but I felt like this was the easiest and cleanest way to do it because, honestly, I don't really like coming up with new mechanics. I'd prefer to use stuff that exists. So whatever I make, I try to make very lightweight because I don't want to get too complicated and make Savage Worlds not fun.
That is one thing I can say about Savage Worlds as far as a baseline genre. Its baseline package is that it is a very sort of pro player. I mean, by pro player, I mean flow the PC character winning sort of forth, kind of thing. They're wild cards. They fight the minions and so forth. And each genre of it does alter that mix or that balance. Do you think your game particularly moves in one direction or the other? Or keeps it about the same as far as, it is sort of pro PC as far as, their overall sort of like they have the slighter edge over the bad guys, or is it, something like their horror or their Deadlands where you're kind of hoping you can pull through?
I'll say that it is pretty heroic level. Even though the heroes can find themselves in some pretty tough scrapes, it does favor them a bit more. It's not, unless you're a GM and you want to turn on certain settings rule like 3D damage or whatever. But just out of the box, Street Wolves is pretty heroic, you can go pretty wild essentially with it. If we step back for a minute and talk about Heart of Glass, I wanted to kind of put the brakes a little bit on the super over the top heroic stuff with this adventure, because you start out, you don't have Wolfpack support in this because you screwed up the last mission so bad. And it's like, they've gone dark. You might technically be kicked out of Wolfpack. You're not sure at this point. You get this mission and you go to this small town and you're essentially a fish out of water. It's this town full of secrets and mysteries and murder and mayhem type of thing. But generally the party is 3 to 5 players, and without any kind of backup in a situation where they don't know who to trust, it really made, at least the first test run, it really made the players not go hog wild and start shooting machine guns and stuff.
Fantastic.
They really had to figure out like what was going on in this place, and they knew that there was some sort of conspiracy. I keep saying conspiracy. I'm not a conspiracy nut or anything like that, but there's powerful people that are doing bad things, but you don't know quite who is involved, kind of a situation. So you can't just go and do that, and
don't know who to trust.
Yeah, some of them are authorities, so I don't really want to spoil too much, but that early in the adventure, the players get pulled over by a cop, and it's could potentially be bad. So it's just like they know right away that it's like, okay, let's try to be really careful here.
That's hard to do sometimes because like murder hobos want to murder hobo, so it's anything you can do to kind of like at least make them a little trigger. Yeah.
I'll say, hey, if you want to do that kind of thing in this adventure, that's totally fine. But that following this adventure, yeah, like you're probably going to be like hunted by Wolfpack at that point, because you are off the rails, and not rails is like railroading the game, because this is a sandbox adventure kind of. It's more like you're going to be a burned agent at that point, right?
Consequences are important in my games, so
yeah. I said Delta Green before. I love Delta Green. It's one of my favorite RPGs to play because the consequences are so huge in that. Because you don't have to worry just about the Cthulhu stuff or whatever. You have to worry about the FBI realizing that you're not actually a real FBI agent either. Suddenly you're on the news. And I actually had stuff like that happen. I have another adventure I was working on that it is like a future one, where there's this cult that's in Street Wolves, and I don't have it as like cult in robes. It's like a real cult that's dangerous. I'm not going to name any cults so you don't get sued.
We can just go with Jim Jones. I mean, they're pretty much done.
Well, like, this one is pretty savvy with the media and keeping tabs on people and recording them and bothering. And so I ended up with players that did bad things, and then they turned on the news one day, and then there was like an advertisement from the cult, under a front organization saying, have you seen these people? They did these bad things. Call this number, right? Like
Crime Stoppers.
Exactly. It was something like that, where it was like Crime Stoppers org or something,
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, man. So we talked about some of your TTRPG and like the TV influences for this, and I want to get onto some of your other stuff pretty soon, but are there other media influences that you use for this system?
It was a lot of I watched as much 80s stuff that was neo-noir as possible, so and I'm blanking on a couple of movies and stuff, but it was really leaning into that Miami Vice kind of darkness in LA reigns. Alphabet City.
That's what it was. Yes. Yep. Alphabet City.
Yeah. So, Alphabet City. So what was Alphabet City about? I don't think I remember that one.
It's about a drug dealer, essentially, that his boss is unhappy with him and decides to eliminate him. But that's the plot, basically. He goes from place to place, and he encounters people, and it's real gritty, and every shot is very rain-soaked night
Yeah.
lights. It's totally a vibe movie. It's got a really ridiculous ending. I don't want to really ruin it.
Don't ruin it. I still get to
But
see
it-
it.
You know,
I just saw the preview and I was like, this is
yeah, the
ridiculously
guy
fun.
from Police Academy that does all the voices is in it.
Oh yeah.
He's
Michael
a minor.
Winslow or something?
Yeah, he's in it. It's great. But it's not a perfect movie, but it was just when I saw it, I just thought these are the vibes of this game. And unfortunately, not a lot of people have watched the movie, so I can't go, oh, it's just like Alphabet City, because they're not going to know.
So Malcolm, you had something you want to?
Yeah, my question, my first question is kind of like, you've watched a particular type of genre within the 80s that you've watched for inspiration. And the question, but I was like, was there someone you ever consulted with it who lived from that time period, or who? It's just a general question. Like, what are your sources that are not beyond media? I'm reading this. I read it, and I'm like, well, it is an alternate. That's one thing I should point out. It is an alternate timeline, 80s timeline, which from when I love the idea that it's alternate, and I love the alterations because it's a lot of fun. As far as but it still happens during the Cold War. We still are dealing with the USSR. We're still dealing with a lot of the situations that we dealt with that shaped our lives as far as how we viewed the world and how we think. Now, I'm going to say, despite the grittiness that is in, Street Wolves, I do find it, once again, like many of the shows I watched, a pleasant departure from the lives from our real true day lives.
Yeah.
I mean, we really don't want to get the existential dread of knowing that, at any point in time, someone could mess up and we're going to be just nuked out of stone, And even here in America, we felt that way. Nothing compared to people living in Europe, But it was just like there's a lot of things that aren't carried over, which I'm kind of glad. And you even have a whole entire. You also talk about, if you wish to bring these sort of elements into the game, it's your choice, but it wasn't a part of the mechanics that we built in it necessarily. And that, believe me, that's, I think, perfectly fine to have a sort of disclaimer saying, if you want to bring this craziness in there, all this ugliness, you're free to do that. But in truth, as far as what the fun you want to have with the scenario, with the game, I didn't think it's necessary. But I just want to know who you brought in, if you talked to someone about it.
Nobody. No. Mostly, it's just.
And did you think it was necessary? That's the thing.
No, I mean, at the time, I was alive and I was cognizant of things going on, but also, like, I've always been obsessed with the time period I grew up on. So, like, I would read a lot of history and, like, learn a lot about things going on and that sort of thing. And it was just one of those things when I started making it. I've said this before too with Street Wolves, is I try to come at it from an angle like the makers of Star Wars Rogue One came, and I know we're talking about real life, but the way the makers of Rogue One came to making their Star Wars is they wanted to make the Star Wars that they remembered and not the actual Star Wars. So what I was trying to do was make the 80s that people remember, but not the actual 80s. And so, I mean, there's a lot of things that we can dig into with social things that happened and all that sort of stuff. But, at least for the general setting, I was mostly kind of keeping it high level and putting in a lot of the choices I made with, say, enemy factions and stuff was more like, what would be an interesting enemy? And the Cold War was kind of winding down by the late 80s and early, 90s. It was going away. Yeah. But it was like, you know what? We're going to keep the Soviets strong. And then that way, and then also, I think I talk about it a little bit in the book, and I'm probably going to go into this more of the future, is like, the US isn't so great either.
You do talk about that.
Yeah, I do mention that they back certain people who are anti-Soviet, right? And so, that kind of comes from like history that, I've just learned, but also, honestly, Miami Vice, that show goes into, there's people they can't touch because they're protected by the CIA or some other government agency. And so that's the kind of thing I wanted to bring in the game. I'm yeah, I don't know. Is that if that's insensitive or anything?
No, just like I think keeping it. I mean, the decision. I was just decision to keep it at a higher level. I thought was probably best for
I
a
think the
better
way
overall
you put it
appeal.
was beautiful. Like you want to make the game that is the
Accessible.
80s that people remember.
Yeah.
Really, that should be like on the inside cover of the book, because
Well, and
that's
also though the problem with that is because I'm doing the 80s that people may remember that's serious and has issues. If I say, oh, this game's set in the 80s, I also do get, oh, it's just like the 18 or Knight Rider. And it's like, no, it's not. I mean, it might have some of those elements, but there was a lot of serious art and culture and things that came out of that time period that aren't.
Also terrible fashion.
Yeah, good fashion. No, but there's a lot of things that aren't inherently silly, right?
Yeah.
That we can also dig into. So yeah, I never really thought about that going in, was that there would be that issue of like, oh, I want it to be like Transformers or whatever. And it's like, I mean, it has some goofy elements, obviously, but I didn't want to dig into the really over the top stuff,
Yeah.
I'll be honest. I did run a game in Savage Worlds, which was all about the '80s over the top stuff called the Challengers. Which I was like, I love that, but I like this. I love this too. My next question was like, I'm sorry.
Oh no, I was just gonna say that's the thing too. Is like, in order to set my setting apart, I felt like this is the direction I would go rather than going, because there's Freedom Squadron is a cool game, but that's like G.I. Joe where it's way, way, way big, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, I need to make it not that, right? I'm trying to find something that wasn't published yet. Oh, people haven't taken this slice
there is
yet.
a G.I. Joe game now, I think, right?
No, but there wasn't at the time, because yeah, the secret history of Street Wolves is it actually began years ago as a G.I. Joe game that was the serial numbers filed off, and then it died. And then I revived it as a different game.
So how long have you actually been working on Street Wolves?
Well, I had this other game that I basically wrote a book for years ago, and then it just died. Mm-hmm. And then the pandemic happened, and that's when I got way back to it. So it took a couple of years to actually get the book out.
Yeah. Because you've been talking about it for a while, because I guess I've been kind of re-engaged with Twitter the past couple of years, and I like.
I'm sorry for that.
Yeah, I know. Like I stepped away. I've had the account forever, but I really just used it to like.
And then you dragged the rest
doom
of us
scroll
there.
like once every 2 weeks, but now I doom scroll every day.
Yeah.
But you're one of the I think one of the earlier folks I caught on to, and we started talking to the Battle Lords people, and those are super cool guys, by the way.
They're awesome.
Yeah,
they're one of the biggest supporters that I've run into that is a published setting.
I love them.
By Battle Lords and also by Titan Effect, because that's another great one.
Yeah, yeah, definitely by Battle and watch your Battle Lords actual play. It's awesome. Back to you. We're talking about you now. You've done a lot with Savage Worlds, and recently you've been talking a lot about this. I don't know, can I call it a hack? As Star Wars, but in Savage Worlds. Well, what's going on there?
The spirit of rebellion.
Yeah. So, this was a crazy thing. So I wanted to do my own Star Wars in Savage Worlds, just play it for my friends. Mm-hmm. And then so I got this book, the Star Wars Companion by, and I'm going to probably butcher his last name, Christopher Leby. I'm sorry, Christopher. I don't know how to pronounce your last name. But there's a Star Wars Companion that exists, and it's great. However, there's some things I needed to change for my own table, and I figured, well, if I'm changing it for my own table, why don't I make a release out of it? And I became obsessed with it. And so it's basically an expansion for that book. So you start off with Savage Worlds, you get Star Wars Companion, and then you're going to get the Spirit of Rebellion. And they're all, the Star Wars ones are going to be free. I can't charge money. Please buy Disney Plus and, go to Disney World or whatever.
They're going to send you like the Pinkertons with mouse ears.
Exactly. So yeah, mine's all free. It's fan made. It's for fans by fans. And it's basically focusing on the original Star Wars trilogy, Andor, Mandalorian, and Rebels, like that kind of like I call it the dark times to the early New Republic kind of
Mm.
slice of about 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
And it should really hit the nostalgia bone of most people probably listening to this, because
Yeah, yeah.
the design is based a
The
lot
design.
yeah, on Return of the Jedi era trade dress. So it looks like a lot of the packaging of that time, like
Mm.
the posters. People have gotten a West End Games vibe from it, but that's because we're drinking from the same well, essentially.
Yeah,
Because
that's
they were
true.
making their game based on like the last movie that came out, and I make but it's really fun and cool looking. It's some of the best design I've ever done. And I'm sticking the art in it I'm sticking to is mostly pre-production art, some screen grabs, art from toy packages and notebooks and cups. So, an example would be I digitally cut out art from that was on a action figure case. I'm slapping
Mm.
it in there, and then the Atari game, the side cabinet, I found a really good JPEG of that, so I cut out the ships and I'm arranging them on the page. Um, so one of the most fun things about this project for me is because it's fan focused, I'm using all this like stuff that it was essentially used to promote the movies. Um, I kind of have an unlimited art budget in a way, right? It's like I'm not charging anything for it. I'm
Yep.
using trade dress that
Yep.
existed. And so I'm able to go really, really,
Oh,
wild
wow.
with it. So,
If
yeah.
there's one thing I can say that about that, and the same thing with Street Wolves, your eye for design and layout is a really strong motivator as far as getting someone into these games. I mean, when I look at Street Wolves, I am like immediately pulled into it and into its overall vibe and what it wants to do for me as far as what it's presented to me as far as a game and a genre. And I
Yeah.
love that. I
Well,
love
thank
looking at it
you.
Michael's
and,
our
like
artist too.
I love
So
people. I love looking at it and people saying, like, I know what this game is going to, I know I want to be in this game. I'm just looking at it, and there's a lot of companies that are only now, it seems, discovering how much work they need to do to truly transform you looking at their game and enjoying it and becoming a part of it. I mean, Free League is really getting a good job as far as that. But I mean, I look at your game and I'm like, this is the quality we should be getting. And,
I need you
everyone should,
to
tell
call
them.
these companies.
It's like, you need to get this and do this guy and get him or I mean, because I really loved Street Wolves.
You know,
And when I saw just a little bit of the few parts I've seen of the Spirit of the Rebellion, I'm like, I just like this reminds me of the old Star Wars packaging games and so forth. And when you said that, I was like, that's exactly what it was. And yeah, Western games, and you were pulling from the same well, so I get that same sort of good feeling about it.
yeah,
And
and
I'm ready to dive in.
because I did look through the books to see if there was any layout that I wanted to rip off. I mean, you're creatively rip off because
Yeah,
that's what graphic
that's what we
designers
do.
do. There wasn't like it was a lot of real old school stuff. There wasn't really stuff that I wanted to pull. There was a few ideas I got from one of the books back here, but overall, it was like I was mostly the spirit of those books was getting them. I didn't even play Star Wars when I was a kid, but that was the only Star Wars stuff really coming out regularly. Well, I didn't have anybody to play with. That's a whole nother story. But I would get the books and I'd pour over them. Like I would look through them and they had those fake ads in them, for
Yeah,
planets and stuff.
love
And it was
that.
just this experience on its own, separate from playing the game. That's one thing that I like to do with my layout is like I want you to have an experience looking at it. You don't even have to, play it. It would be great if people played the games, but I also want you to have fun looking at it and looking at all the cool art and all this stuff. And I'm glad you brought that up too, because at some point, hopefully this year, I'm going to do a Street Wolves Kickstarter to get a print version. And I'd actually like to go back to the Street Wolves layout and update it from things I've learned recently.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Because I feel like I did a really good job, but then there's things that, any artist is like, ugh, my old Stuff
Yeah,
sucks.
I could just do this again. It's like it's horrible. And everybody else is like, this is fantastic. Like, no.
Yeah, no,
Wait.
it's yeah.
Yeah, like
And-
the stuff that Malcolm did in college, where like drooling and dying over it, and he was like, "Oh, that was garbage."
It sucks. Yeah. So yeah, definitely, because also I wanted to right now I made Street Wolves is 8 by whatever the big size, and I wanna, if I print it, I wanna make it sit nice with all the other Savage Worlds books. So I'm gonna have to shrink it down. So I have to redo the layout anyway.
They're kind of small.
They're little.
little
I
guys.
think they're. Yeah, I can't remember what they're called. They're like magazine size or something like
they're
that.
Like magazine size or something is what these are.
So, I that might not be popular with some people because they like the bigger book, but for me, it's like I want. I have that thing where it's like I want them to look all nice together.
Yeah.
I think I think it's actually. I mean, I'll be honest, as far as like just that regard, as far as like you're right, the sizing with Savage Worlds, it seems to work better when it's all the same size as the regular books. For me, it just aesthetically is. It seems like it's a part of that universe, then part of that. Sort of
I don't like the smaller stuff. It's just.
Yeah, bad eyes. I want huge things, but yeah, I like Savage Worlds. But Savage Worlds, I want the right size. Like literally, like all these books are different genres, but they're all same,
they all
standard,
got a nice
same size as the base book. So.
It's Street Wolves is going to seem fake if it's like this, and then big.
Right? It's like that's not even.
It's like they weren't even paying attention. Oh, what are they doing? Oh, amateurs.
But I will look really. I'm really excited about that, about the Kickstarter when you guys do that, because I am like, if I can get a physical book, I will be happy. I'm happy with the PDFs, but getting a physical book eventually would be great if you go that way. Go that path.
I like to have this wall here of games that I might play before I'm dead.
Mine's are all that.
But they look really nice up there. Do you have like a plan of when you're gonna do that?
I have a plan.
Well,
so
a schedule.
Well, sort of. So everything I've done is to try to build to something else. So, the jump start for Street Wolves was to get me to Street Wolves. And then now basically what I've done with Street Wolves is I've released it, and then I've collected as much feedback about, things that don't work or mistakes. I love hearing about like errors and typos and that sort of thing. And so I've issued corrections. So by the time I get to the Kickstarter, then if a printed book comes out, it's going to be way more correct than if I had just gone for it. I've caught a lot of that stuff. I feel like I've got most of it. There's always probably something that's going to be out there that,
I'll send you a list.
Yeah, please do. I'm totally fine. As long as you're nice about it. So, and that's one reason why I haven't. First of all, I'm not super into the quality on print on demand. I know there's some people that are really upset about this.
That's fine. I'm not. I'm with you kind of.
But what I want is to do the Kickstarter to get my ideal version of the book out. And then I might be able to turn on the print on demand, because then it's like, okay, Street Wolves is out there. And then, if you live in a country that you can't get the book shipped to you or whatever, I'm going to turn on print on demand for you. So that's the plan. But anyway, so the plan right now is Spirit of Rebellion kind of screwed me up a little bit because now I'm obsessed with it. But the next thing I'm doing is I set up a Kickstarter for a very small game called The Wicked Forever King Hungers. And it's a dark fantasy RPG that's based on lasers and feelings. And I expanded a little bit because I have I have like a doom counter essentially that when you screw up, you get closer to failure type of a thing. So it's like a stressful situation. And the art's all that kind of old-timey black and white kind of stuff. Like, the medieval type of
medieval block print stuff.
Yeah. And so, it ends up being about 4 pages right now, but it could have some more content depending on how well a Kickstarter does. The Kickstarter is really small. It's basically just initially to pay for a proofreader, and then after that, an artist who will make a image of the Wicked Forever King himself, and then also for my time to do more layout work. So those are kind of like the tiers, and then there's going to be like little extras, like a letter from the king, or you could become a member of the royal court kind of stuff. But it's all digital. and it's all exists because I wanted to make this game and I think it's fun, but also to give me a experience in how to run a Kickstarter before I do the big one. So once I get that out of the way, then I'll be able to fulfill that pretty quickly because the game is mostly written and done, except for any additional stuff. And then a few months down the road, who knows? I don't know if I'm gonna try to do Heart of Glass out first or the Street Wolves Kickstarter. One thing I hadn't mentioned about Heart of Glass that people might get excited for is there's actually an audio component to it where the Street Wolves are going to be picking up cassette tapes as clues, and the clues I'm going to include actual audio
files
portions, and they're going to be recorded by Megan Caves of Gone Rogue Entertainment, who's doing Harbingers and former Wildcards member.
Cool.
So I'm very excited to work with her to do the audio stuff. Maybe someday we'll release an actual cassette tape that has the information on it. Who knows?
I was like, and there's 4 of us that can play it.
I've looked into it. You can get tapes made, and it's not that expensive, so we'll see. But so because of that extra production quality, I don't know if I could knock that out before. You know what I mean? It's just kind of fluid between that and the Kickstarter. So we'll see.
What's going to be on these tapes? Are these going to be like tapes of crimes happening, that kind of thing, or like?
Well, I don't want to spoil too much.
I'm just like literally. You just asked him, "Can you spoil the entire product?" I would love to hear what
I'm just trying to think, like as an audio guy who's working on sound design stuff, this is like relevant to my interest. It's like,
so what if I just make something up for you then?
Like answering machine tapes.
Make it up. I want to hear what your answer is.
So there is they're going to be like, possibly like recordings of particular like audio surveillance, and then maybe some sort of phone call you picked up here, or maybe even a sound bite of some particular famous person saying something or singing something, you don't know, or just traffic, or just basically maybe one will be a crime scene situation that you hear.
I love your answer more, and I'm going to change the entire adventure now.
And you got to figure out what order, where they came from, and everything else. Yeah.
Well, if you want to look up Megan's Adventure Bones on DriveThruRPG, it's essentially that product, but incorporated into my adventure. Like it's Adventure Bones are mostly written to be more open,
an open-ended added thing, and it's just like and that's the way I love them. It's like, well, I haven't been able to use them because I can never figure out how to get my party to get to a point where they'd actually be
listen.
Yes.
So is it kind of like the legends that they use in Forbidden Lands? Is that kind of thing where you have like all these just like random legends that you can kind of?
Oh, that her thing says his. I think as far as for Heart of Glass, there will be components of the adventure that will be carried over by audio.
Yeah,
I got you.
Yeah,
I'm interested now. No.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those things where I could see people missing them, and so they're not entirely. The whole adventure doesn't depend on you finding one tape or two tapes or something like that. But so far, the players have been really good about finding them and going from one to the next, and they haven't. It's not railroady or anything like that, because it's like, they can do all these other things and then come back to the clue that might lead them there. It's kind of like there's a branching web where certain nodes you hit, right, you can get them on those nodes to be like, oh, this is where the tape is, this is what's on it. So
that sounds fun. There's a lot of different ways you can do that. I mean, I guess it'd be a little bit tougher for like an online game, but there's ways around that.
I mean, you can possibly save it as a part of an audio file with a V2, with a tabletop thing, where it's like, and what was that clue? And here we go.
Like
I'm playing tape number 6 found in the dumpster.
And
I have a soundboard that goes through my microphone, so I'll play like machine gun noises and that sort of stuff.
And I'm kind of like, why don't you do that, Nathan?
Because I have to customize each machine gun to the actual scene that's in. I don't use the same machine gun sound twice.
Boy.
Yeah, he's that. And I love that. It's like the machine gun fires far away, and then you're getting closer, and you know the guy in the shooter is coming somewhere closer,
Yeah,
and you're still like, he does that, all that kind of crap.
I can't
Creatures,
do that.
monsters, all
close,
that too
medium,
much.
and far, and like, is it what kind of room is it? Is it inside? Is it outside? We have the most overworked podcast.
That is intense.
For the ridiculous people we are playing this game. So adding these very interesting components as far as to Heart of Glass, I think will be a great thing, and I think I really am looking forward to it. It's one thing I love when you have in a game or adventure or module, whatever provided, and that there are things beyond just the flat page.
Yeah.
And considering your design taste, I am just like, yay! I do want to get a mug. I do want a poster. I still want a map of a city or two, but that's me.
Yeah. Well, and I like handouts, like going back to Delta Green, they have all these kinds of handouts, and then players will make up the most amazing looking handouts that look like official documentation and stuff. And there were people that recorded audio stuff. Have you done that too?
Yes, I did the dossiers and the photos.
He would draw stuff for my games because I have zero talent for that. But,
and did letters and notes and stuff. But
when I was running G.I. Joe, I had like dossiers, and I would make a letter from Duke, and it looked like it said top secret, blah, blah, blah. And then I like had like a signature on it, and then like photos clipped to it and stuff. Yeah, I love that kind of stuff.
They're suddenly become engaged more with that.
If you think about like the games we grew up with, like with D&D and Star Frontiers, like all the modules for those had like tons of handouts. Like half the module was handouts.
And one thing I can say that I really look forward to, and I hope that that you would might consider, is a bibliography of a videography of like, just so people when they get that book they'll have an idea of like, these are some movies, these are some songs, these are some shows.
Did you have that in there?
I didn't know if you had that in there. No.
Oh, I have that in there.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, so I have some suggestions like that at the end of the book. So I have like, some synthwave songs to listen to, some synthwave albums, and then pop songs to listen to. And then like, you don't have to do any of this stuff. Like if you've watched Stranger Things, you don't have to know about the 80s to enjoy Stranger Things. But there's that extra level of like, if I'm a GM and I want to run this game, like what is synthwave, right? So then, I might want to explore it a little bit more. I have a thing about montages in Street Wolves. So it's just basically a real loose way to run a montage, which is basically like a round robin storytelling method where it's like you just go from person to person. Like, what are you doing in the montage? And you go back. And I have suggestions for songs to play during the montages. Like, if you're doing a shopping montage, here's 6 songs. If you're doing getting ready for battle, here's 6 songs. And I was a little nervous about actually including the names. You know what I mean? You don't know with copyrights and stuff. But I wasn't actually doing any lyrics or anything. I was saying go out and listen to this song, right? So I think we're okay with that. But
yeah, I think you could use that as like reference stuff because a lot, like all of the books we have, like all the like Dungeon Master's Guide and stuff, like they always have,
and
like,
every GURPS book has a huge we'll do that. We'll literally have a whole entire video filmology and music video, and everything else. So I think it's fine as you're listing as sightings as examples of the genre or something, or sources, as opposed to having it inside
if you could actually make like a little QR code with the Spotify playlist of the songs.
Oh, you should.
Well, I have. There is a Street Wolves
soundtrack.
If you look on Spotify, there is a Street Wolves official playlist, and it's got. So basically, the way I organize it is I have a kickoff song, essentially, like you play it to everyone gets ready to play, and then I have a bunch of songs to play while your characters are doing a mission. So they generally don't have lyrics because I get distracted by lyrics and songs.
Yeah.
And then at the end, there's like all kinds of pop songs from almost every genre. Maybe there's only 3 or 4 from each genre from that time, but kind of representing those musical cues and stuff that you might want to hook into, like, like I said, the montage of shopping or something there, you might want, Girls Just Want to Have Fun. So you just scroll down their search and there's Girls Just Want to Have Fun. Right. So
that's awesome. I'll link that too in the comments. So
Okay,
look for that.
It needs more likes. There's only a few on it right now. So
All right. Well, we have our mission. Go like some Spotify.
You know what's actually funny is I have about 12 Star Wars role-playing game Spotify playlists out there, and one of them has over 200 likes, which is kind of cool. But it's
neat.
like space battles, and I was just using it to we were playing X-Wing online the other day, and we were listening to that. So you know, there's all kinds of cool stuff I'm making. It's just, you know, some of it's free.
Yeah, let's run them down. So Street Wolves is out on Drive-Thru and Itch. You're gonna have
and the jump starts out there too.
Jump starts out there
for
too.
Free.
Yes, yeah, free stuff is always good. You know, dip your toes in before you pull the trigger. First Kickstarter you're doing, the what's that called again?
Yeah, Wicked Forever King Hungers,
which is
I also have an archetypes.
That is really cool. I mean, I'm sorry,
it's cool. It was hard for me, my old brain, to remember.
I was partially inspired by a story I heard about, and now I don't even remember most of the story, but it was something about an old pope that drank the blood of young people or something, and I was like, that's horrific. And then I was like, well, maybe, whoa. But I was like, what if there was this eternal king that he would wake up and get super hungry? And there's actually a table of like what he hungers for. That's kind of funny, but
that's good.
I have Archetypes Volume 1 for Street Wolves, which is just pre-gen characters if you want them. There's one for each profession at all ranks, so all levels. And then it does come with the VTT tokens that you can use for them. All the art is done except for the dog that I have in there, because there's a dog partner that Daryl the dog. All the art except for Daryl is done by my buddy Mike Todd, who has a stake in that. So please buy it so Todd can buy himself some coffee or something.
Okay.
So that's what's out now is Archetypes, Street Wolves, and then the Jumpstart, and then Wicked Forever King is going to come soon. Star Wars is, I'm hoping, coming out soon just so I can get it off my plate. So maybe in the next few months. And then I'm testing Heart of Glass again, and that's probably going to take a month to test just because it's going to be the last run through was four 3-hour sessions about. So it's a pretty meaty adventure. So but if we can only meet once a week, it's going to take at least a month to test it one more time. And I'd like to maybe have somebody else test it too. And then potentially the Kickstarter, cross my fingers, maybe this year. So
it'd be awesome. I mean, whenever you're ready. I know it's one of those things where you have to kind of build it up and get people ready to pull the trigger on day one. So just keep an eye out for that, and they can sign up for a mailing list, right? On your
So if you go to tablecatgames.com, that's basically the hub for everything right now. So you could get to Itch or Drive-Thru from there. But on that main page, if you scroll down, there's a mailing list thing. You sign up for the mailing list, you get a discount on Street Wolves, on Itch, and on the Table Cat Games website. You can get access to an archetype that's exclusive to people that join the mailing list, because it's listed as $500 on my site. If anybody wants to buy a $500 archetype, please do. But that's a technical hurdle, right? That like I don't have a way to do it any other way, so I just marked it up to $500. But you get a coupon that's 100% off. Right. And that character is Bubbles, who appears in a Street Wolves AP played by Cassie Mothwin. The AP was done by Crossroads Games, Kerry Smith, and everything. So it's kind of like
they're great.
A merging of a couple people. So you get a free thing and then a discount if you join the mailing list, and barely any emails. I haven't sent one out in months. I've like when Street Wolves came out, I sent maybe 4 and I felt bad about it. And then so I don't like sending emails. I reserve it for when something is pretty big, and then I try to combine things like, oh, here's the 6 biggest things that are happening. So sign up and don't get
a while. So you don't
spam
spam at all. Yeah.
Okay, good. Yeah, I was gonna say you probably unfollowed after I released the game because a few people did that.
That's it's weird. Like the whole like you try not to take things personally, but sometimes it's weird. Like because we'll get like every time we do an interview, we get like a boost in like follows and stuff like that. So we'll get like 5 followers, and then one person will unfollow. It's like they just watched all the stuff they wanted, and then they unfollow. It's like, come on, it's like it doesn't cost you anything to subscribe to somebody on YouTube. Why would you?
Especially YouTube, yeah. Yeah, the email thing was like, it's weird because it's like, at first there were no like unsubscribes because everyone was like getting ready or in anticipation.
Yeah.
Then once it's out, you go back to, I'm going to send an email and 1 or 2 people are going to unsubscribe because you're reminding them that, I don't know, whatever, they don't like the thing or
they already got the thing.
They just didn't want to hear it. So you're basically sending them a little reminder. Hey, why don't you unsubscribe from me? So, every time I hit that button, I'm like, ooh, let's see how many I lose this time. But, and then you can kind of dig into those things and you'll see the person never opened an email or something. And you're like, who cares?
And you really like, you don't like, if they don't want your stuff, like, nobody owes us subscribers. So it's like, if they've gotten what they've gotten out of it, that's really a win.
Yeah, totally.
You just take the win and don't let it hurt your feelings, even though that
it still does.
I still want.
As long as you get more pluses than negatives,
yes,
then
we do. It's always better to go in the positive.
Always goes up.
But if I send an email and like a couple hundred people unsubscribe, I'm gonna feel really bad.
There are very few times. Okay, there's like one that I can think of where I've ever decided like I really should just unsubscribe from these people.
The only time I do it is,
but that has to be a really bad project.
For me, it's like big brands and stuff, or like you'll sign up for something, they'll send you an email every day, and it's like, what are you thinking? I don't want this.
I like my Lucky Jeans, but I don't need coupons every day.
And I'm not going to forget. I need to actually wear them first.
Anyway, Paul, is so good to finally talk face to face.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. It's been fantastic.
Banter on Twitter is fine, but this is so much better.
Well, let's do this every week then. It'll only take you like weeks to edit all of our conversations.
Yeah, so it'd be great.
Anyway, so this is fun, but definitely when you're ready to do a Kickstarter, maybe we'll do like a little. We could do a short little snippet if you want to talk about any of those. You're welcome to come back anytime if we haven't scared you off.
No, that's great. I like it. And if you cut this out, if you're not going to do it, if you want to give away a copy of Street Wolves and the Archetypes document to one of your listeners, I can give you a code for that too, or I'll give them a code if you just have them message me if you have that mechanism set up.
Yeah, I think we could probably do. I could probably do like a little announcement and say, listen to the end for Paul's favorite Star Wars movie, which is. So by the way, Paul, what's before we cut off?
You're killing me.
Sophie's Choice. Which is your favorite Star Wars movie?
Well, if it's a choice like that, I would pick. So I'm going to give you a tiered answer, but the real answer is Return of the Jedi. Like, Spirit of Rebellion is like essentially Return of the Jedi filled. But you know what? Empire and Rogue One are real neck and neck with that. Okay. And it's not a movie. You didn't say show, but Andor is way up there with me now too.
Yeah, those are all good.
Yeah,
I don't know if you see it over there.
No, there's a crappy poster.
Yeah, so that's my wife worked at Blockbuster, and when it shut down, she grabbed one of those particle board Empire Strikes Back posters.
Oh, nice, yeah.
That I've carried all over the country. So
I'm not even going to pull out my beat up Return of the Jedi poster that I've gotten.
I mean, you can probably see some of my toys.
Oh yeah. I was like, oh, I love that set.
Yeah.
But the thing is, I was curious what your favorite Star Wars movie was going to be.
Yeah, I think it's, it kind of goes back to, I've had them kind of pass another in different periods of my life where it's like, oh, I think I like this one more. But it's always kind of gone back to Return of the Jedi, basically because that's the one I saw in the theater that I remember
Mhm.
seeing in the theater.
Okay.
And, that's all the merchandise and all the promo, like that was all Return of the Jedi, right? So that was the one that got imprinted in my brain. My eyes are really watering right now. I don't know what to do. I'm gonna start crying. I guess I was crying about Return of the Jedi.
That's okay. Those tears are fine. And we'll respect you.
And I'll say this
Original
about
Ewok song or new Ewok
I
song?
like the original. I would say that about Ewoks is I had that period where I was too cool for Ewoks, but no longer. Ewoks are the best. So
I mean, they're little cannibals. What's not to like?
yeah, exactly.
That is true.
Paul, again, thanks for coming on.
Thank you for
great
having
talking
me.
to you. I look forward to seeing what you continue to keep creating, and it's amazing that you're able to find time in this crazy world to put something out to help other people have fun. So I admire that. So yeah, thanks again, Malcolm. Any final words before I hit the trap door?
Sure. It's going to be pretty much very similar. I just want to say that, we were great. I mean, I'm very happy that you were able to make this a wonderful game that should be hopefully enjoyed by a lot of people. But one thing I can say is that I'm very curious to try out the relationship component in some of my games with my guys and players who play Savage Worlds and see how they like it. I'm also curious to see how that plays into Drive, how the montage, as well as how the leave time all sort of functions in a sort of, action investigative game for them. But also, it's like I was very distinct looking at your product and saying, Street Wolves feels and has this great sort of like setup that I really like to explore. And I'm, thankful that you were able to like give this to the world and have an amazing design eye for it.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Yeah, and I hope that after playing it, you'll understand why us Gen Xers are so cynical and jaded about everything. So
yeah, there's that.
Any final words there, Paul?
I'm not actually crying. I'm having some sort of allergic reaction right now, so just so everyone knows. But no, I really appreciate everyone who plays. Let me know if you have a good time at your table. Just keep in touch. Check my stuff out. Maybe you'll like it, maybe you won't. If you don't like it, don't tell me. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good night. Thanks for watching.
Have a good night, everybody. Thank you so much for
listening.
Bye.